So today is the beginning of a new series called the Chakra 3.0 series. It all began a few months ago, maybe longer ago, maybe a year ago. I did a normal chakra series. And this was just all about what we normally understand about chakras, about health and relationships, mostly about relationships, because that's something I'm really passionate about how we actually interact with each other and how that works through the chakras. And because I believe that's actually part of what the world is healing right now. We've lived in separation and distance from each other for millennia. Whether that was the consciousness, whether it was the world, the difficult world we live in. But for whatever reason, we've sort of defined everything, our relationships, our life, in terms of separateness. How do I get along with you? As opposed to how do I deeply connect with you? And this is very different. How do I get along in a difficult world as opposed to how do I merge with the world? So this connection piece is really central to everything I want to do. It's why I have a new book coming out called The Union of the Masculine and Feminine, not gendered. It's just the energies of these two, or these two energies, how they merge. So anyway, huge passion of mine. So that was the first chakra series. And then I was teaching my yoga teacher training, the Living Masters program. And it's really interesting these days because my experience of the world in the last couple of years, as much as there's so much difficulty and divisiveness and political challenges and everything, it's interesting because on the opposite side of that is this massive awakening. And this is my experience. It's not maybe everyone's, but what I'm really experiencing for me and a lot of people I know and talk to, there's this awareness rising inside of us that's really brand new. And I believe that part of it's because the old systems are falling outside of us and therefore they're falling inside of us. It's almost like because they don't have this big hook that they once did out there, they're disappearing inside of us. So then what's happening is we're starting to see the world clearer. We're starting to understand things that were very confusing before, things that we once had great attachment to. We don't have attachment to them anymore because they're kind of dissolving. And so the Chakra 2.0 series was this realization that, we often talk about the chakras like, oh, well, I have issues in relationship because my second chakra is blocked. Or I have issues with manifestation because my first chakra is blocked. And the challenge with that is that we have this, just even the wording, our language is so important. The wording makes us think that there's something wrong with our chakra. There's something wrong with me. And if my first chakra is blocked, how can I fix it anyway? Because it's like I'm inherently flawed. Now, I'm actually broken from the inside out. And then I came across this amazing teacher named Cindy Dale. She had this idea that there were actually these parallel universes happening. And on the one hand, there was this world of light. And this world of light is our chakras, because these chakras are perfection, right? Our chakras are divine, perfect, whirling balls of energy, right? Wheels of energy. Our chakra, nothing's going to happen to our chakras. It's almost like if you lit a flame, the flame is just the flame. Maybe wind blows it, but the flame is a flame. You can't cut off a flame. You can't cut it in half. It's always just a flame. And that's like these whirling wheels of energy inside of us. There is no such thing as a half chakra, right? So Our basic essence is perfection. But then there's this world out there, this crazy, kooky world that has been really hard historically. When we go back in time and you look into the dark ages or the medieval times, or even we look at places and things that are happening in the world right now, and we're like, how can this be happening? And yet it is. And the truth is, it's been much, much worse, And it's not unhealthy to admit that. This talk today is about healing the first. It's about healing the interface of the first chakra, which I'll talk about in a second. But part of that is admitting that the world's nuts, right? And not in a negative way, not in a, oh my God, life sucks, it's not like that. It's just going, aha, it's raining out. Aha, it's cold out. That's it. There doesn't have to be a judgment on it. It's just, we've lived in a very difficult situation for millennia. And it's important to allow that to land. Because if we sort of try to look at the world through rose-colored glasses and say, no, I mean, we always have to find the good in things, and there's probably reason for it. And, if we keep doing all that, we actually deny ourselves the truth of our suffering. And again, this sounds all very negative, but it's important. It's important to actually allow our experience to be our experience and not sugarcoat it. There's nothing worse than, you're going through something like forget about childhood stuff right now, just right now. Let's say you're going through something and you're really hurting and it's really hard, and maybe you're in a real dark night. And let's say you choose to share that with someone. And they say, well, it's not going to last forever. And, you have to look at the bright side. I mean, you have right? This is not helpful. In fact, it's really annoying. I remember, I'll never forget, my mom died when I was 25. And I was pregnant with my first child. I was 3 months pregnant. And I remember being at her funeral, and of course I was devastated, absolutely devastated. My whole family was just destroyed. And some people would come up to you and you could tell they were with you. They were like, I don't even have the words. And that was the most comforting thing. And then there'd be someone who was uncomfortable with grief, or they were trained in a certain religion or something, and they would say, well, don't you worry, she's in a better place. And they would do this up talk, and you just looked at them like, you kidding? That groundedness of even grief is a healthy first chakra, right? That we actually live in what we're in. We don't let our head get all caught up in it, right? This is the challenge, is when our head gets caught up in whatever we're experiencing on the earth, whatever we're experiencing in our emotions, they're fine. It's when our head gets in it, that's when we add fear to it. That's when we add stories to it. That's when the first chakra becomes really messed up. But that grounded experience, that acceptance of what is, this is very healthy. It's kind of like, if your land is flooded, you need to admit that it's flooded so that you can build a boat or you can get to higher ground. This is real. This is real life. And our world is very heady. It's very much based in fantasy. And when we live in that fantasy world, we never even admit what's going on in the first chakra, So that was a bit of a segue. So when I was looking at this Chakra 2.0 series, this idea that the inner chakras are perfection, including our first chakra. But then there's this kooky world out there, kooky, cruel, mean, separate, it's, really, really scary place sometimes. So how do you do that? How do you interact with this really dysfunctional world? Because it's very dysfunctional. It's very lacking wisdom, lacking intelligence, lacking rational thought. Like it's pretty crazy. How do you interact with that? So as humans, we created this interface, right? We created an interface, almost like a raincoat against the rain, or an umbrella or a snowsuit against the cold. We created an interface with this world that we were born into. So, which was really important. This interface is where the adaptations live. This is where the blocks exist. This is where the programs exist that we had to learn in order to stay alive here. Sometimes it's how we learn to stay alive. Sometimes it's just programming from the world around us, which was not healthy. Like even first chakra stuff. Like one of the big things in a healthy first chakra, it's a world of abundance, right? We live in an absolutely abundant earth. And yet, if we listen to the news, or we watch the movies, or we talk to certain people, you would honestly believe that we all lived in abject scarcity, poverty, whatever. And some people do, like we, don't have enough money and we don't have enough food and all that kind of thing. But it's actually not true. It's actually a false scarcity that we've been born into because of all this whole weird organizing the world based on money. And then there's this idea of royalty or the elite, and that these people are more interesting than these people, and these people, because they have money, are more important than these people. These ideas weren't something we developed out of survival. They were just very strange programs that we adopted from the society that we're living in. Maybe based on the people who created that society, who created those ideas. I don't know. That's a massive rabbit hole. That's not really the point, right? If we get caught in that rabbit hole, we're going to miss our own healing. But for whatever reason, the world has created this tiered living that these people up here get the abundance. These people have a bit more, have some. These people have to work hard for the abundance, and these people don't get any. This is a deep training, and that's all living in the interface, because it isn't true. Every single soul that is incarnate on this planet is totally equal in their divinity. Like every one of us is fully connected to to God, to the universe in our seventh chakra, to the earth, to the mother in our first. Every single one of us has these beautiful, divine, infinite centers inside of us. The fact that some of us have been told that, oh, no, but you, based on your birth, based on the family you were raised in, based on your experiences, you don't get any abundance. You don't get all that there is. But this, again, this whole idea lives in the fantasy world, right? It lives in this idea that those people deserve more, those people have the money, I don't, blah, 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 blah. If we delete this very strange world that I believe is ending, I believe that that's part of this time, that this difficult time we're in right now is this shifting into an ascension of some flavor. And again, I don't think it's something we can even discuss well, because it's our consciousness that is shifting, and so it's like we can't even fathom it right now. But it's like you can feel it. You can feel something interesting. Because and this idea that abundance is, or the lack of abundance is really just part of this fantasy world that's been sort of pulled over our eyes. And then we do experience it. Like, don't get me wrong. It's not that this hasn't manifested. But it isn't the reality of the earth. It isn't the reality of us. It's like you think of something like food. If you go to the store and you get a tomato or a pepper and you come home and maybe you eat the flesh, but you save the seeds. One red pepper, if you planted those seeds, would create hundreds of pepper plants, or at least 50, right? And each pepper plant would create, what, 5 peppers? From one pepper, you just made 250 peppers, right? You go and you buy a squash and you grow all of those squash seeds. So many squash. Like, we can't even get talking about zucchini, right? Like, that's actually the world we live in. You know, I live in a very small town, and it's surrounded by rural areas, farmland. And you drive along and you see the farmland, you know, and it's all cultivated, flat. And on the edge of the farmland is the forest, and the forest is lush. And you can feel the forest almost leaning in to the farmland. It's almost like saying, you can almost feel it saying, just stop working the land for a year and we'll move in. And another year and we'll move in. Like, I often think, you know, if we stopped farming for like 5 years, we'd be back to full forest. You know, this earth is lush. The challenge is that our eyes have been focused there. See the scarcity, see how scary it is, see over there. And this is a really important thing, to really look at the programs in the interface. It's not us. The human being understands abundance. You know, just all we have to do, no matter who we are, is lie on the grass and look at the stars. You know, we can't actually explain that. We can't actually say, oh yes, yes, infinite space and stars. I understand it, but it's not like that. It's like you lie there and you look at the stars and they inform the cells of our bodies, and we remember. We remember that we are also infinite beings with infinite possibilities and infinite potentialities lying within us. And this is why it's very interesting to be careful about what we listen to and what we watch. You know, do you watch the news? So, for example, one of the challenges of the interface of the first chakra. So the first chakra is, in a healthy space, the world is abundant. I am safe. I am here on the earth. I am manifest. I can find shelter. I can find food. I have community. I have nature, right? That this is the healthy first chakra. But the world out there, what if you were raised in a home that showed us that no, actually you can't trust people, and there isn't always enough food, and being at home isn't necessarily safe, or being in my neighborhood isn't necessarily safe. Like, we didn't make this up. What if this was our reality? And again, if you heard about it on the news, that's different. But if it was your reality, this is a challenge, right? Because we adapted, we created a program to survive that, you know? And that program might have been, you can't always be sure there's food, so you'd better hoard, you know, save food for a rainy day, right? Which can turn into all kinds of things, right? Maybe if you learned very early that people weren't safe, maybe our parents or our family, there were alcoholics, or there was abuse, or there was anger, or there was fighting, or there was neglect, or there was abandonment. We very quickly learned correctly that you can't trust people. Of course, unfortunately, when we're little, our family is our entire universe, right? Our parents, our siblings, our grandparents, these actually represent the whole world. They represent the 7 billion people on the planet. And as a little baby, we don't know any different. It's like our own Truman Show. I don't know if you ever saw that show, but the movie. That's the entire world. You know, it's kind of like a lot of times when we have our first marriage. You know, when I was married for 20 years, And that was obviously my first marriage. And there's something interesting when you're young, you get married for the first time. I think this is changing. I don't think it's the same today, but when I got married 30 years ago, and you start to define the world and relationships based on that relationship, right? You start to make generalizations about, for me, for men, right? Because I'm heterosexual. So men always do this. Men always do this. Men always do this. Men always do this. In my first marriage, not my first relationship, but my first marriage, and that's the official thing. So we make all these generalizations based on this one person about an entire gender of people. Then maybe one day you get divorced, and then you start dating. Maybe there's some people out there that confirm your vision of reality. But then you start to realize, oh no, wait a minute. Actually, not all men are like that. Wow. Actually, lots of men aren't anything like that. Wow. And you have to start unprogramming what you learned in the marriage, or maybe from your upbringing about your father or your grandfather or whatever. And you have to actually start rewriting that script. In a lot of ways, it's very similar to the childhood script that we write about people. And if we were raised in a difficult home, even if we were raised in a safe home, but maybe a neglectful home or a cold home or whatever, we will define the world based on that, because why wouldn't we? Right? This is our most intimate experience. It's good information, theoretically. The key is to really be aware of what we've written down in our book of life, to say, people are like this, women are like this, men are like this, parents are like this, family is this. Because if we can get out of that and imagine that maybe some of that isn't true, maybe the truth is that some men are like this, some women are like this, some families are like this. And again, it's so important to not let our head get in there and start to ask the questions like, well, why did I have to have that? Why this? Why that? As soon as we start asking these why questions about the first chakra, we're in so much trouble. Because for whatever reason, and maybe there's no reason, that was our foundation. That was our first 7 years. That was our first foundational experience here on the planet. And we can't ask why questions of the first chakra, or we will end up navel gazing about this for the rest of our lives, and we will never find a solution. And we'll never be able to reprogram that interface between the first chakra and the world. So instead, we kind of look at it in the same way as we might look at reprogramming our thoughts about relationships that we've experienced as an adult. And this is really, really important, because those first years of our life are so formative. You know, we really define a lot. And those first few years of our life are our first chakra energetically, you know. Some of the reasons, some of the things that get caught in that first chakra interface also are childhood traumas. And I don't take that lightly. And when we've experienced traumas as children, that's a massive adaptation that we had to have in that interface to survive. And it's really important to get counseling for that and to do somatic work to release that trauma, not just talk therapy, to actually, you know, what's his name? There's a great book. Peter Levine did a lot of work on trauma. And, you know, he talks about how one of the worst things that we can do when someone is, say, in a car accident, because the first thing that happens is they go into shock and they start to shake, right? And the first thing that people are trained to do is to give them something to stop the shaking. And he talks a lot about how that locks the trauma in the body because the body can't shake it out. And this is why, like in a lot of like say Kundalini yoga that I teach, when we want to release depression, we actually shake the body. Or in Osho meditations, there's all this shaking, right? And because we have to shake out the trauma that's locked in our bodies. And so the one thing is, if for you, if there's a lot of trauma in your childhood, then there's really important things. This is not something that we just intellectualize ourselves out of. There might be some reprogramming that we can do philosophically about people and the nature of life and all that. But then we have to really honor that the body has stored this trauma and has to be released somehow. And whether it's through yoga, whether it's through therapy, whether it's through running marathons or climbing mountains or swimming in the ocean or something, there's some way that that trauma has to be released so that you can be whole again. And then to have faith in becoming whole again. Because one of the things that does also get locked in our systems at a young age in that first chakra interface is that there's something inherently wrong with me, right? When we're abused like that, we actually think it's very personal, as opposed to understanding that no, that person was just a pedophile, that person was just an abuser, that person has an anger issue. It isn't about me. But as a child, we internalize it and we think it's about me. And that belief we can carry on through our whole lives. That no matter how much healing I do, there's something inherently wrong with me. And that is something that we can look at. And that's why there's something about this understanding that the chakras themselves are clear. The person that abused us is in this shadow world, is in this outside world. And there's an interface in between us, some kind of protection. But we are fine. We were just children, right? And there's something about shifting that philosophy that does help. It doesn't replace the therapy and stuff, but it does help. And so it helps give us a different context. So in this light of that, a big part about healing this first chakra interface, there comes a need to actually reparent ourselves. Because ideally, as a child, we have parents who allow us to grow. They make it safe. We're nourished. Maybe, and our parents have wisdom. And I don't mean wisdom like they're telling us stuff, but there's wisdom to know what's helpful and what's not. And it's not controlling or anything like that, but there's just an awareness in the parent. Like if you imagine, say, a few generations from now when people have been doing the work and they've been doing the yoga and they meditate and they have this deep center and they have children, there's sort of this different awareness raising them. And again, not putting wisdom in the child, but just simply having an awareness, really, really different than our parents and their parents who literally were just sort of raising kids on a string, just barely maybe making it by financially, still struggling with the, sins of the forefathers and all that kind of thing. But imagine how different it could be down the road. So sometimes if we recognize in that in ourselves that I really do feel like a child who really is seeking someone to love me like a parent. I really need that security. I need that safety. I need someone to love me in a very special way. Then we actually can become that for ourselves. And it's kind of the only way, because we can't, if we try to seek it in other people, we can do it for a little while and we might be able to find a bit of solace there. But in the end, we actually need to develop it ourselves. So what does that mean? Right? This is why there's all of this focus, an important focus on self-love. Because it's literally like loving ourselves as a mother would love a child or a father would love a child. And being kind to ourselves, being kind and saying, it's all good. What you're feeling is important. Really seeing ourselves. You ever have that someone actually looks right into your eyes and sees you? that you're not just a player in their world and they're kind of just doing this, but they actually look right at you and they see you. This is part of reparenting ourselves, to look in the mirror and say, hey, I'm so glad you were born. Like, and genuinely do it. And if we can't do it, then we have to work on it and we have to play with that. And really, that's a whole journey of itself emotionally, to really, really understand that. And this is 100% possible. To be that wise parent for ourselves. This is again part of our yogic journey, to actually do whatever it takes to cultivate and to connect with that deep wisdom inside of every one of us. And actually then take that wisdom into our own lives, not to criticize us or anything like that, but to actually sit, and when something is going on, that we can take that deep breath, sit in that witness self and say, I think this would be best for us right now. Right? That's reparenting ourselves. That's actually caring for ourselves, accessing that deep wisdom and applying it to our inner child. We can do that. A huge part of reparenting and feeling that safety in that first chakra is being able to trust. Because when things went amok, if things went amok when we were children, we really struggled to trust. And maybe it didn't go amok with our parents, but it went amok in the world. How in the world can we trust? So now the question becomes, in this journey of reparenting ourselves, it is, can I trust me? Can I trust me to stand up for myself, to protect myself? It's funny. A while ago, my daughter came on Insight Timer. And I don't know that the audio ever got uploaded to Insight Timer, but the video's on my YouTube channel. And we were talking about healthy boundaries with other people. And she had the most interesting insight about me personally, because I've really struggled to have healthy boundaries in my life because I'm too much of a people pleaser. And she said, one of the challenges that you have, she's talking to me, she said, you as a mother were such a mother bear. She said, you would defend us to the nth. And she goes, we knew it. We knew that you always had our back no matter what. And she says, the challenge is for you to be able to do that for you. And that was so interesting for me to hear and it really helped. I was like, wow, that is so true. And it's so interesting how, I literally would tell you that I'm a pacifist unless you hurt my children. Then you're dead. Then I'm like Durga with all the, the weapons. Just choose your method of death. And it's a really interesting thing to be protective of self and not to be constantly throwing ourselves to the wolves so that we're always fighting, but just to know that deep down, I always have my own back. I can trust me to show up no matter what, and that is so interesting, and it's a quiet trust. Sometimes the trust is that, if something's amuck in the room, I trust myself to remove myself from that situation. Or I trust myself to say no when no is the truth. But that trust is now developed between my inner child and my outer world, right? My parent self and my child self, however you want to see that. Or your masculine self and your feminine self, if we want to get out of the child analogy, right? Is my masculine self strong enough to protect my feminine self, right? And this is within all of us. But this is our journey of reparenting, of getting that really healthy first chakra so we feel safe in the world, right? If I always know that I have my back, and think of that for a minute, of course, because I'm super passionate about the masculine-feminine dynamic. One of the challenges of the world that we've lived in, this shadow world as opposed to the world of light, is that it has been this unhealthy patriarchy. And again, this isn't something about men, right? This is just that energetically in the world, the masculine energy, which has mostly played out through men, but it's not men's fault. Men are suffering a lot trying to heal from this too. But the masculine energy in the world has acted in separation and then oppressed the feminine, right? So whether it's the men oppressing women, or teachers oppressing students, or the government oppressing constituents, or man oppressing nature, whatever it is, it's the energy of the masculine oppressing the feminine constantly in the world, which is what we're suffering from. This is this weird shadow world, right? And again, not gendered. There's a pile of women who also do this. So we have to be careful to get out of this gender idea. So now all of a sudden, why do we have a messed up first chakra or a messed up interface in the first chakra? Because our own masculine is also messed up, right? Because that's the energy of the shadow world. That's why when we develop a strong masculine inside each of us, that doesn't have to fight, will if it has to, but it will keep us safe. And it'll make sure we're cared for. It'll make sure we're nourished. The parent of the child is the masculine, regardless of the gender, because they care for, they nourish, they keep safe. So that's really what we're developing, is our healthy masculine self to actually keep that first chakra, to keep that child safe. And that's a really interesting journey, you know. Another big part of the first chakra, the healthy first chakra, is our connection to nature. And when I say nature, what I mean is the earth, the real world. You know, there's a real difference between the healthy ecosystem of nature and a downtown core filled with glass buildings and concrete. These are very different worlds. One is kind of like a creation made of Lego, and another is, you know, a garden. Yesterday I was out for a walk, and I was just walking down the street. It was kind of a weird, kind of quiet. It's been really rainy here. And so it was kind of overcast and quiet. And I was just wandering along. And all of a sudden, I heard all these birds. And I was downtown in my little town here. So it was all the concrete and buildings and all that kind of thing. But all of a sudden, I could hear all these birds chittering, which was kind of just uncommon. It was just a funny sound. It didn't make any sense. And I turned and I looked, and this business that actually was called Nature Way or something, they sold bird seed and stuff like that. They had created this tiny little garden. I've never seen it before, or I'd walked by it and not noticed it. But they'd created this little garden, all fenced in, and there were sunflowers, and there was moss, and there was all this. And the birds were just going crazy. It wasn't even like they were bird feeders. But there were birds and stuff, and I sat there, or I stood there, just staring at it, and almost like absorbing the sounds of the birds. It was like so natural. It was so heartwarming. It's like every cell of my body just started to vibrate with the sounds of the birds in this middle of this little downtown core. When we get to connect with that kind of nature, another part of our being wakes up. It's like our human body was designed to thrive in nature. You know, I often tell you guys about my first teacher, Jim, who helped me back in 1999 when I had breast lumps and I had my healing crisis. And he was really interesting. He used to go and dowse for water, right, with dowsing rods to find places to dig wells and stuff because we live in a rural area. And I remember when I was sick, when I was working with him, he was the first person I ever really trusted. He was the first person that really, saw me, not this facade, not the farm wife, not the student, not the daughter, but saw my soul. And I trusted him so completely. And I had a friend who was a very, very religious person. And she was very concerned about my faith in this guy because she'd heard stories about him that he was, the devil, or he was evil, or he was whatever, and anyway, and she was a journalist. And so one day she decided she was going to go and do an article on him because he was also an organic farmer. He farmed about 3,000 acres, which was a huge deal to farm organically around here, especially 30 years ago. And so she went over to see him, and she goes, well, first of all, I'm here to do this article on you. But the real reason I'm here is because I'm really concerned about your involvement with my friend Katrina, because I think you are a bad influence on her. And the other thing is she had heard that he dowsed for water. And of course, this, in her religion, this was also the work of the devil, and, this was wrong. And he said the most interesting thing that I've never forgotten. And he said, don't you understand that this ability to find water is a human requirement? Before we had all this air quotes civilization, we had to be able to feel the water with our bodies. We had to be able to know and have an inner knowing that water is this way. There was no other way to do it. This was how we survived. He said, how do you think we knew what plants were poisonous and what weren't? When our hands went over certain berries, our bodies would recoil if it was poisonous. And other things were nutritious, so our bodies would lean in. We learn about this in muscle testing now. We learn about it in energy medicine. We learn about this, that this is a completely natural human ability. This is our connection into nature, right? So we might call this today, because of course we've sort of had this, again, civilized out of us, this natural connection to the earth. And so then what happens is we don't trust ourselves to survive here, because we've lost our inherent abilities as humans to even find water or to know whether food is healthy for us or not. Right? Again, this is what I mean when we live in this very strange, fantastical world created in the mind that has nothing to do with reality. Right? And don't get me wrong, I love living in the fantastical, crazy, philosophical world and all that. Like, I get it. But it is really important to also deeply live in the real world. And what's interesting about that, so how do we redevelop that? We start to trust our instincts. We start to trust our spidey senses. We start to reconnect with that sense inside that says, I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think we should go there today. Just little things. And, we could say that, we talk a lot about following satya, following our truth. But very often we think of satya as kind of these upper chakra truths, right? This is my truth about life. This is my, it's sort of that kind of truth. Satya also exists in the first chakra and the second chakra, where our bodies say, no way, and yes, no way, yes. And in the first chakra, it's, we go this way for water. We go this way for nourishment. We go this way. It's kind of like imagining a single cell amoeba. A single cell amoeba, his first chakra, well, maybe there's only one chakra, I don't know. They know exactly what's safe. So if there's something over here, if it's nutritious, the single celled amoeba goes, oh, delicious, and it goes towards that thing. And if this is dangerous or bad for it, it swims away from that thing, right? We need to develop that again. We need to trust our instincts again. And this is something that all of us, regardless of our upbringing, need to develop, because whether we were raised in an abusive home that we absolutely couldn't trust our senses, or we were raised in the most posh luxury and we're so far removed from what's real that our first chakra is completely blown as well, or at least the interface. See the language, right? It's all about that first chakra, but the interface is completely disconnected from reality anyway. But we can do this in really tiny ways. And again, it's like, do I feel the truth in my first chakra? And it could be even something interesting like, even sexually, for example, we ignore this. We ignore the messages of our yoni or vajra. When the vajra says no, it doesn't get hard. When the yoni says no, it doesn't get wet. But we don't trust it, and then we force it, and we drug it, and we take this, and we take that, and we do this, and we do that. And it's like we're literally going against our first chakra wisdom. There are exceptions to these things, but I'm just saying as a general chakra talk here, right? Why don't we listen? Why don't we listen to the wisdom here, right? This is how we heal it. And it could be something really simple, like you just play with this and you walk down the street and there's this little voice that says, go this way. Just trust it. Like we just have to start developing the pathways of listening to the wisdom in the body. And when we start to do that, something really interesting happens, that there's a trust that happens. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic and all that, everybody in our world, as I'm sure you guys are the same, this massive divided split, right? And it doesn't matter. I mean, I don't want to into that. But my daughter, again, who some of you guys have met, she was like utterly unaffected. Like she absolutely did not take sides. Like she just didn't. She just was her own self all the time. And I remember asking her one day, like maybe a year ago, I sat her and I said, what is it that allows you so much inner peace about this? And she said, I don't know. She says, I just know that no matter what happens, I trust myself to make the decision that's right for me. This is a huge deal, that we develop the kind of trust in our own body messages, heart messages, emotional messages, that I know that no matter what, I will make the right choice that's right for me. This completely reprograms the first chakra interface, because no longer am I at the whim of the world out there, because I trust me. And this is really interesting because the first chakra in Sanskrit is called Muladhara chakra. And what it means is base, support, right? Where I sit. So now imagine yourself sitting cross-legged on the earth. And you have a strong base, right? Because the challenge is when we've had a difficult childhood or a difficult upbringing, we often try to find that support in other. We try to find it in other people. We try to find it in relationships. We try to find it in institutions. We try to find it in philosophies, in movements, things like that. But that doesn't work. We actually have to integrate it ourselves. We have to actually have a strong root ourselves. And this is where, when we sit and we actually feel ourselves that I am part of this earth. I am made of the same particles that this great earth is. I trust my connection to that. I trust that if my spidey senses say no, I will say no out of my mouth. If my gut instinct says get out, my feet will take me out of this situation. This is a huge deal. Because if we are driven by our minds instead, well, we may not leave that job because the money's too good. We may not leave that relationship because I'm afraid that there's nobody else out there. And so our brain is constantly going against that first chakra. So the way to clear it is to actually sit there and say, none of that's real anyway. What's real? Always asking, what's real? And even if the fear is real, that's okay. Fear is just a construct in our brain. We can go, yeah. What's real on the earth? What's real? Oh, there's 7.5 billion people on the planet. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of possibility out there. Oh, there's a lot of other jobs out there. There might even be jobs I like better. Oh, that extra money isn't worth, losing my family and all my free time. Right? Like, it's a very interesting thing to get into the sobriety of the first chakra, right? And I say sobriety very seriously because the brain can be drunk on drama, can be drunk on love, can be drunk on pride, can be drunk on success and how we are seen by others and all that kind of thing. And it can just live up here and so ignore the truth. So ignore the truth of what we're really feeling. Am I even happy? Do I even like what's going on right now? Can I be sober enough in my own self to actually look around me and live in the world I actually am living in? And then find that abundance, find that safety within myself, right? It isn't that the world has to be safe. I have to be safe. And I have to know that I'm going to follow my spidey senses and skedaddle if I have to. It's kind of like those stories of the animals who escaped the tsunami because they listened to their spidey senses and got out of the area. That's safety. The world can do whatever it wants. We just have to trust ourselves for that. I'm going to stop there because we're at the hour. Apparently I could keep talking. But actually, I want to say one more thing. Another really important way to heal that interface. The first chakra is also the physical creation of things, the manifestation of things. Ideas and inspiration may come from other chakras, right? But we actually manifest physically in the world. So it's a very interesting thing to manifest the things you want to do. And it can be simply the fact that you have choice. You can stay or go. You can turn left or right. You can make the things or not make the thing. You can do all these things. You have 100% choice. It's almost like that's what lives in the first chakra. That's what gives us the safety. But it also allows us to create. And there's something really magical about these chakras aligning, that we have all this beautiful insight from the upper chakras. We go down through the body, we understand who we are in the third, we help other people in the second, and we manifest out the first. So it's one of those things that says, write the book. Build the thing. I see, this is like paint the picture. This is where I think the things that we once deemed as just hobbies, because life was so focused on work and money in the shadow world, in the world that we've come out of and are still sort of living in. The things that we love to actually do with our hands, the things we actually love to do with our bodies, I think are more important than we ever thought. But because we've sort of oppressed the physical, right? No, the mind is more important than the body. Intellectual learning at school is more important than trades and stuff like that. We've sort of made the physical body kind of lowly or something. It's not lowly at all. Manifesting things are incredibly important. Being of some earthly good to the planet and the people in the village, this is really important. So one of the most beautiful things we can do to heal that interface is do things that are of earthly good to the people around us. Not just theorize, not just be in our heads, not just have great ideas, but manifest the ideas. And even if it's hard, or even if it's a journey, then that's the journey back into the first chakra. Make stuff happen. Try things. Maybe you fail, maybe you don't. Who cares? Right? We're just playing. You know what I mean? We can't get too caught up again in the head. The head is what makes up all the drama. Oh, look, you failed and it didn't work. Like, who cares? It was fun. Did stuff. Be like a child. Built a sandcastle. Built another one. Went and did something else. They're not thinking about that first sandcastle. They're off doing something else. Just keep creating. And that's a really active way to shift that first chakra, because then you start to realize, like, wow, I made that. Like, I remember the first time the first book I ever wrote was What If You Could Skip the Cancer? And I'll never forget, like, looking at the first physical copy of it, going, wow, I made this. This didn't exist before I made it. This thing. And it could be anything. It could be playing a piano. It could be painting. It could be anything. It's like, that didn't exist 5 minutes ago. And there's something really healing about that shifts us, that makes us say, no, I am a powerful creator. Even if all it is an amazing meal, or an amazing jigsaw puzzle or whatever. I did that. I altered the world around me somehow. Maybe that's why I'm here, Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful day.